Alright, so I recently heard this crazy story that I would like to share with you guys. I did a little research on it, did a little digging, and the story checks out for the most part, okay? So, just kind of like, just walk with me here for a second. So, 200 years ago, in a town in Mexico, there was a little girl. This little girl was very sweet. She was very innocent. She was full of love. Her parents described her as a joy. She was so pleasant. The neighbors loved her. Everyone in the town loved this little girl. There was just one problem. Every night, doing her nightly prayers, this little girl would pray for Lucifer. Now, when her parents first stumbled upon this, it scared the crap out of them. You know, this little girl is saying her prayers, and they're listening through the door, and at the end, she starts to pray for Lucifer. The parents didn't know what to do, they freaked out. Now, I don't know the exact wording, but what I found on the prayer was the little girl would pray, "Please God, protect my mommy, protect my daddy, protect my family, and please protect Lucifer. No one ever prays for him, so I will be the one to pray for him." Okay? Those were her prayers every night. The parents were freaked out. They didn't know if she was possessed. They didn't know if there was something wrong with her, if somebody may have hexed her or whatever. So the parents went to the town priest, explained to the town priest what was going on. Now, upon hearing who it was and what was happening, of course the priest did not believe them. He didn't believe them. So the parents invited the priest over for dinner one night. The priest accepted, came over for dinner, had a great dinner, kept his eye on the little girl. Didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Like I said, she was very sweet, she was very kind, she was very well-mannered. He enjoyed his dinner with this little girl and couldn't understand why the parents were freaking out until it was time for the little girl to go to bed. The parents said to the priest, "Okay, this is what we needed you to see." The little girl cleans up, she goes to her room, she shuts the door, she gets ready for bed, she starts to say her prayers. She says her prayer. Upon hearing this, the priest was shocked. He was a bit disturbed, but he still didn't see anything wrong with what she was doing. He still didn't see anything wrong with her. He told the parents to keep an eye on her. That's all you can do. He said, other than that, I don't see where the problem is. Now, unfortunately, this little girl became very sick shortly after. And I'll explain what happens in part 2. Alright, part 2. So, this little girl becomes very sick, okay? She becomes very ill. Now, I don't know the nature of her illness. I don't know the details of it. Again, this was 200 years ago, and I found a lot of this information on the internet, so you gotta bear with me. The parents went out foraging for food for them to eat. It was around winter time. It was very cold out. Now, while they were gone, this little girl had an accident. Now, again, I don't know the nature of her illness, but whatever it was that was wrong with her, this accident would have not been a problem if she wasn't sick or didn't have this illness. But because of this illness, she unfortunately passed away due to this accident. Okay, now, the parents were distraught. Okay, they were beside themselves, as any parent would be. You know, you just lost a child, and a amazing child at that. Now, after this little girl became sick, before her untimely demise, she continued to pray. She continued to pray for her family. She continued to pray for the devil, okay? Now, fast forward after her death, her parents are extremely grief-stricken and distraught, and they don't know how they're going to pay for the funeral that this little girl deserves, okay? Now, one day, this beautiful horse-drawn carriage pulls into town, okay? It is beautifully handcrafted. It has ornaments on it. It's decked out, and it's covered in red roses. This carriage is being pulled by 6 Clydesdales. Now, I don't know if anyone knows much about horses, but my favorite horse is a Clydesdale. And the reason why it's one of my favorite horses is because it is one of the biggest horses, naturally. 6 of them. And driving this carriage was a young, light-skinned man who was described as being extremely handsome. very well dressed in a black suit. And the one thing that stood out more than anything were this man's bright red eyes. Okay? Now, as crazy as that sounds, there are hundreds of witnesses to this man, this young man. They refer to him as the young man with the red eyes. Okay? He pulls his carriage up to the home of this little girl, who, by the way, her name is Alondra. Okay? He pulls his carriage up to Alondra's home, and he briefly speaks with her parents. He goes inside, he sees the little girl. He picks her up, he takes her back out to his carriage, he puts her in, and he proceeds to drive into town to go bring her to the church so they could start her vigil. Now stay tuned for part 3 so I can tell you how this ends. Alright, part 3. So, when this man was carrying a little girl out of her house into his carriage, he was holding back tears. You know, he was extremely distraught and sad. He put this little girl in his carriage. He took her into town to the church so that they could prepare her for her vigil. He paid for everything. He paid for everything. He sat in the front during her vigil and he cried. There were hundreds of witnesses that saw this young man, this young handsome man, and they said that he cried with the pain of someone who was extremely close to this little girl. He cried the whole time. He could not be consoled. Okay? Now, fast forward to them bringing the little girl to her burial plot. When they all arrived, they noticed that she had a beautiful burial plot, a beautiful headstone of a carved angel. She had red roses all over her burial plot, and they took the little girl's body, they prepared to drop it into the ground, and they started to bury her. It was at this point that the young man's pain and crying reached a crescendo, and they said that he screamed out in pain and anger. And when he did, it is said that even the strongest man present at this funeral was struck with fear, like to their core. Okay? Now, once they lowered the little girl into the ground, this man said his final farewells, put one last red rose in there with her, and he turned to leave. Now, the mother stopped him and asked him, "Why would you do this? Why would you do all of this for my daughter?" And the man replied, this was his reply: "I have been alive for millions of years. In that time, I have been made out to be the lowest of the low. I have been made out to be evil incarnate. Your people have been taught to fear me all the time. Okay? With all that, your daughter was the only one to ever pray for me and pray for my safety." And he continued to walk away, and the father stops him and says, "But who are you?" Okay? And the man turns around and he says, "If you want to know who I am, the answer is at the end of your daughter's prayers. Okay? I am Lucifer." And they said that in front of a whole congregation of hundreds of people, that this man just vanished like that in front of all these witnesses. Every year, on this little girl's death anniversary, there are fresh red roses on her tombstone, and it has been said by many witnesses that on some anniversaries, you can see a beautiful young man crying over her grave.